The first thing I saw when I came home was not a broken window, not a stolen car, not some obvious sign that someone had messed with my property. It was my swimming pool. Except it wasn't a pool anymore. It was a giant hole in the ground filled with dirt, broken concrete, and construction debris like someone had decided my backyard was the neighborhood dump. My name is Michael Bennett. I'm 45 years old. And before this happened, I honestly believed that owning a home in a quiet Florida community meant I was finally done dealing with unnecessary drama. I was wrong. I lived in a place called Silver Palms Reserve, a Mediterranean-style neighborhood outside Sarasota with 280 homes, red tile roofs, perfectly trimmed lawns, and the kind of peaceful atmosphere that looks great in a real estate brochure. I bought my house in February because I love everything about it, especially the backyard. It had an old saltwater pool that had been sitting unused for several months, but I didn't see it as a problem. I saw potential. I already had plans to completely renovate it. New pool surface, upgraded filtration, modern lighting, new tile work, the whole thing. I had a contractor lined up. The estimate was around $40,000, and the project was scheduled to begin in early April. I thought I was being responsible. Apparently, my homeowners association saw it differently. The president of the Silver Palms Reserve HOA was a woman named Carol Whitmore. Carol was 54 years old and had a reputation around the neighborhood for treating every community rule like it was written into the Constitution itself. She wasn't the kind of person who simply noticed things. She searched for things. She walked the neighborhood almost every morning with a clipboard in her hand, taking pictures of garbage cans, garden decorations, mailbox colors, and anything else she believed violated the community image. Some neighbors joked that if a bird landed on the wrong roof, Carol would probably send out a violation notice. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I understood why communities needed rules. I worked in commercial development, so I knew permits, regulations, and standards mattered. But there was a difference between maintaining a neighborhood and controlling every person living in it. About a month after I moved in, I found an envelope from the HOA in my mailbox. Inside was a violation notice claiming my empty pool had become an eyesore and a potential mosquito issue. Carol referenced a section of the community guidelines that required homeowners to maintain their properties according to neighborhood standards. The letter gave me a choice: either fill the pool permanently within a certain time frame or face weekly fines of $1,000. I remember reading that letter twice because I honestly thought I had misunderstood it. They weren't asking me to clean it. They weren't asking me to cover it temporarily. They wanted me to destroy a perfectly functional pool because they didn't like how it looked while I waited for renovations. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I responded calmly. I sent Carol my renovation plans, my contractor's estimate, and the scheduled start date. I explained that the pool wasn't abandoned. It was being prepared for a major upgrade. I even offered to provide updates during the renovation process. I thought that would solve the issue. I thought once she saw proof, this would become a simple misunderstanding. A few days later, Carol replied. Her message was short. She said future improvements did not excuse current violations. The pool was still considered unacceptable, and the HOA expected compliance. That was the moment I realized this wasn't really about a pool. It was about authority. Carol didn't want a solution. She wanted me to follow her decision. I still didn't believe she would take things further. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I assumed there were limits people wouldn't cross. But a few weeks later, while I was away for a short weekend trip, everything changed. When I drove back into my neighborhood that Sunday afternoon, I noticed something strange before I even reached my driveway. There were tire marks near my property, heavy equipment tracks. My first thought was that maybe my contractor had started early, but then I saw my backyard. I stopped walking. I just stood there trying to process what I was looking at. My pool was gone, not drained, not repaired. Gone, filled completely to the top with dirt, broken concrete, pieces of asphalt, and piles of construction waste. It looked like someone had buried my backyard under a mountain of trash, and standing there, staring at what used to be my pool, I realized this wasn't a disagreement anymore. Someone had made a decision to cross a line, and they were about to find out that I wasn't going to simply accept it. I spent the next few minutes just walking around my backyard trying to convince myself there had to be some reasonable explanation. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe a contractor had gone to the wrong address. Maybe someone had misunderstood the situation. Because the alternative was almost impossible to believe. Someone had looked at my private property, made a decision without my permission, and filled my pool with tons of material like my home was some kind of empty lot. But the more I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't an accident. This was planned. I started taking pictures from every angle, documenting everything before touching a single thing. I knew enough about property disputes for my work in commercial real estate to understand one simple rule. Emotions might tell you what happened, but paperwork proves it. So I started looking for paperwork. The first clue came from a pile of documents left near my mailbox. It was a work order from a local hauling company, and there it was, in black and white. The HOA had hired them to deliver and dump approximately 45 tons of fill material into my backyard pool. The person who approved the job was Carol Whitmore. The invoice showed the hauling company charged the HOA $4,600 for the work, and somehow, the HOA had already prepared a statement billing me nearly $8,000 for what they called emergency property compliance action. I remember actually laughing when I saw that phrase because it was so unbelievable. Emergency. That was the word they used. Apparently, according to Carol, my empty swimming pool was such a danger to the community that the only possible solution was to send trucks onto my property and bury it. I immediately called my pool contractor, Daniel Ruiz. The same guy was supposed to start the renovation a few weeks later. He arrived that evening, looked at the damage, and his expression changed from confusion to anger. Daniel had been in the pool business for more than 20 years, and he told me he had never seen anything like it. The debris wasn't just dirt. There were chunks of concrete, old construction materials, and random waste mixed throughout. Removing everything safely was going to be expensive. His estimate was devastating. More than $50,000 just to excavate the material, inspect the pool structure, repair possible damage, and restart the renovation. But the money wasn't even what bothered me the most. It was the fact that someone had decided they had the right to do this. That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by documents, photographs, and emails from Carol. I kept reading her messages over and over. The confidence in her words was almost unbelievable. She never once asked for permission. She never once mentioned a legal process. She simply believed the HOA had the power to fix whatever it didn't like. The next morning, I called Carol. I wanted to hear her explanation directly. I wanted to know if maybe there was some detail I was missing. She answered the phone sounding completely calm, almost annoyed that I was questioning her. "Michael, I don't understand why you're making this into a bigger issue than it needs to be," she said. I looked out the window at my destroyed backyard and honestly didn't know how to respond. "A bigger issue?" I asked. "You filled my private pool with construction waste without my permission." Carol sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "The HOA has responsibilities. We had to protect the appearance and safety of the neighborhood." I asked her one simple question. "Where did you get permission to enter my property and do this?" There was a pause, a long one. Then she said, "The HOA documents give us authority when necessary." That answer bothered me more than anything else because it showed she truly believed she was right. She wasn't hiding what she did. She thought she was allowed to do it. That was when I stopped trying to negotiate. I contacted an attorney who specialized in property disputes and HOA conflicts. After reviewing the documents, he gave me the answer I was hoping for. Carol had made a massive mistake. Under Florida law, an HOA generally cannot enter an owner's private property and perform non-emergency work without proper authorization, especially when that work causes damage. And this wasn't just a disagreement over community standards anymore. This was unauthorized access and destruction of private property. But there was something even more concerning. When my attorney reviewed the photos, he noticed some of the debris looked unusual. Some of the older construction material appeared to potentially contain hazardous substances. That changed everything. We contacted county officials and requested an inspection. Within 24 hours, an investigator arrived at my property. I watched as he walked around the pool, taking notes and examining the material. At first, he didn't say much. Then he asked me a question I will never forget. "Do you know exactly where this fill came from?" I told him everything I knew. The HOA, the trucking company, Carol's instructions. He looked at the paperwork and shook his head. The county investigation moved quickly. They determined the HOA had dumped construction debris without the required approval and without proper disposal procedures. The property was immediately flagged for violations, and the HOA received thousands of dollars in penalties for illegal dumping. But that wasn't the worst part. A few days later, environmental inspectors arrived after concerns were raised about possible contamination. They tested samples from the debris and discovered materials that required specialized removal. Suddenly, The situation was much bigger than a neighborhood argument about an ugly pool. The woman who claimed she was protecting the community had created the exact kind of problem she said she was preventing. The HOA that once gave Carol unlimited confidence was now asking questions she couldn't answer. Board members who had supported her started distancing themselves. Neighbors who once avoided conflict began stopping me on the street, asking what was really happening. Some admitted they had received warnings from Carol before and weren't surprised. Others were shocked because they never imagined someone would actually go this far. Meanwhile, my attorney prepared the next step. We filed a lawsuit against the HOA and Carol personally, seeking damages for property destruction, unauthorized entry, and environmental violations. The amount was substantial, but for me, the lawsuit was never just about money. It was about making sure someone couldn't simply use a position of power to damage another person's home and walk away. Carol had spent years making everyone believe the HOA was untouchable, but now, for the first time, she was the one answering questions. And the next meeting at Silver Palms Reserve was going to change everything. The emergency HOA meeting at Silver Palms Reserve was the kind of night nobody in the neighborhood would ever forget. For years, those meetings had been predictable. People would sit around discussing landscaping schedules, holiday decorations, parking rules, and whether a certain shade of paint was acceptable for a front door. Carol Whitmore loved those meetings because they made her feel like she was in complete control. She would sit at the front of the room with a folder full of documents, explaining rules in that confident tone that made people think arguing with her was pointless. But that night was different. Nobody was there to ask questions about their lawns. Nobody cared about mailbox colors. Everyone was there because one homeowner's backyard had become a symbol of something much bigger. What happens when a person with authority starts believing they are untouchable? When Carol walked into the room, I noticed something I had never seen before. She looked uncomfortable. She still tried to carry herself the same way, shoulders back, acting like she was simply dealing with another complaint. But the atmosphere had changed. The people sitting around her weren't afraid anymore. The same neighbors who once stayed quiet when they received questionable warnings were now looking directly at her, asking for answers. One board member who had supported Carol for years asked the question everyone wanted answered. Why did you authorize work on a homeowner's property without getting written permission? Carol immediately tried to shift the conversation back to the HOA rules. She said the pool was a safety concern, that the neighborhood had standards, and that she was simply doing her job. But another board member interrupted her and said something that completely changed the room. Doing your job doesn't mean you can ignore the law. For the first time, Carol didn't have an immediate response. She had spent so much time enforcing rules on everyone else that she forgot those rules applied to her too. The investigation, the legal documents, and the environmental reports were all sitting on the table in front of the board. There was no more pretending this was just a misunderstanding between neighbors. This was a decision that had consequences. After hours of discussion, the board held a vote. 6 members voted to remove Carol Whitmore as HOA president. 1 person voted against it. And, just like that, the position Carol had fought so hard to control was gone. The same system she had used to pressure homeowners had finally held her accountable. The legal process continued for several more months. My attorney worked through every detail of the case, from the unauthorized entry onto my property to the cost of restoring the pool and dealing with the contaminated materials. The final settlement was reached after negotiations between my legal team, Carol, and the HOA. The HOA agreed to pay $275,000 to cover the damage, repairs, and legal expenses caused by the incident. For me, the money was never the most important part. No amount of money could undo the feeling of coming home and seeing something you worked hard for destroyed. The real victory was proving that a homeowner's rights still mattered, even when the person causing the damage was someone with a title and a position of power. Carol's situation became much more serious. The authorities continued their investigation into the improper disposal of construction materials, and she faced criminal consequences for her actions. The court eventually found her responsible for the violations connected to the dumping incident. She received the sentence that included time in custody, probation, and financial penalties. She also lost her professional license, which was a major blow because her career had been built around understanding property rules and regulations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The person who spent years telling everyone else to follow the rules had ended up being the person who broke the most important ones. By June, my backyard was finally transformed again. The cleanup process took weeks. crews carefully removed the debris, inspected the structure, repaired the damage, and rebuilt everything the way it should have been from the beginning. The first time I stepped outside and saw clear water in that pool again, I just stood there for a moment. It was quiet, no arguments, no letters from the HOA, no threats of fines. Just a normal backyard that I had almost lost because someone decided their opinion mattered more than my rights. And honestly, that moment taught me something I didn't expect. I went into the fight angry. I wanted Carol to understand what she had done. I wanted her to feel the frustration I felt when I realized someone had crossed a line. But over time, I realized the bigger issue wasn't just Carol. It was the idea that any person in a position of authority could convince themselves they were protecting people while ignoring the damage they were causing. Rules are necessary. Communities need organization. A neighborhood can't function if everyone does whatever they want. But rules are supposed to create fairness, not give someone unlimited power over others. After everything happened, my neighbors asked me to join the HOA board. At first, I wasn't sure. I had seen firsthand how easily a position like that could be abused. But eventually, I decided the best way to prevent the same thing from happening again was to help change the system from the inside. My first proposal was simple. Any HOA action involving private property would require proper documentation, legal review, and homeowner notification unless there was a true emergency. No more assumptions. No more "we thought we could." No more decisions made behind closed doors. Looking back now, I still think about that afternoon when I opened my backyard gate and saw my pool buried under tons of debris. At that moment, I felt like someone had taken away control of my own home. But that moment also became the reason I fought back. Because sometimes the biggest mistake people make is believing that because they have authority, nobody will challenge them. They forget that power only works when people allow it to go unchecked. And once someone finally stands up, the entire system can change. So I want to ask you something. Do you think Carol was trying to protect the community but made a terrible mistake? Or do you think she crossed the line the moment she decided she could enter someone's property and destroy something without permission? Where do you think an HOA's responsibility ends and a homeowner's rights begin? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just about one pool in one neighborhood. Stories like this raise bigger questions about fairness, property rights, and what happens when rules become more important than the people they were created to protect. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life style battles involving property disputes, HOA conflicts, and ordinary people standing up against unfair treatment, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because sometimes justice doesn't arrive quickly, but when it does, it has a way of reminding everyone that nobody is above the rules.